So hi everyone, welcome to this Provar webinar, Provar 101. Today we'll be doing a quick introduction to test automation with Provar. So this is a great webinar to be at if you're new to Provar or currently evaluating us. We'll start off with some introductions then. My name's Hetty Boardman-Weston and I'm Head of Marketing at Provar. Presenting with me today, I'm very happy to welcome my colleagues John Robinson and Michael Daly, and I'll be passing over to John in a minute to start things off. So if we take a quick look at the agenda, we're going to start by reviewing the Salesforce testing space and talking about where Provar fits in. And then we'll get into some customer stories with Splunk and Armbrands, and we'll share a bit about how Provar has been working for those organizations. In the middle of that, we'll also be doing a live Provar demo, so you can see what's happening in the tool and see it a bit in action. And then at the end of the session, we'll quickly cover off Provar pricing, and after that, we will have some time for questions as well. So if you'd like to ask a question at any point, feel free to do so. If it's during the main session content, the best way to ask a question is to type it out into the questions box. And we'll pick up as many of these as we can at the end of the session. The other thing to mention as well is the webinar is being recorded, and I'll make sure that the video is sent around to all attendees tomorrow in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with any team members. And that's it from me. So at this point, I will hand over to John to start us off.
Thank you, Hetty. So let's start by talking about what the problem is. The problem we're looking to solve is, at the end of the day, manual testing, as a lot of you guys have come to find out, is pretty costly and time consuming, right? It's especially when it comes to trying to scale that. So the next logical step there would be to all right, let's automate things. Unfortunately, code-based automation brings its own set of challenges when it comes to scaling, and it makes it a lot harder to then start to flesh out this bigger ecosystem. In addition, general tools that are widely available in the marketplace aren't really suited to working for the Salesforce ecosystem, right? It's designed to support the wider market rather than any single platform. When it comes to Salesforce specifically, some of the things that we're talking about are, just general reliability of the field locators, especially when you're moving across different environments, going from dev to QA to staging. You add in the complexity of handling things like console, Visualforce, LWC, and that difficulty starts to scale exponentially. And then finally, you do manage to get all of that done, and you get it to a point where it's usable, and you have to take into account then the reusability across different UI. So moving from classic to lightning, that's incredibly difficult. So how does Provar handle that? We are designed to follow the Salesforce mantra, clicks not code. We like to make it as simple as possible. It's point and click test creation. We'll show that here in a bit on the demo, but it's very easy to get in and start creating tests and managing and working with them, to the point of not being able to keep up with the Salesforce changes and things that are coming down the road. One of the things that we do is align very, very closely with each of those Salesforce releases. So on day one, when Salesforce drops a new release, we're ready to go out of the gate. So we, when Spring 20 comes out, before Spring 20 is out, we'll have our release ready that is Spring 20 compatible. In addition, it's designed from the ground up to be compatible with both Lightning and Classic, and whatever comes next, right? At some point, there will be the next Lightning, so to speak, and we're good to go there. How do we do that? The biggest area there is we are driven based on metadata. So Provar pulls down the metadata from your org specifically. It's not something that we pre-build or anything like that. This is actually pulling in live from your environment. And then as you make changes in that metadata updates, we're able to update how we target and find those elements on the screen using that metadata. So it's not just a, find it the first time and then you have to figure out how to manage it anytime you make changes. Now, if there's a change that's made, the idea is that Provar will recognize, oh, hey, you changed this thing over here and it's now not where you said it was. Let me go ahead and update this test case accordingly. And it really, really cuts down on the amount of maintenance that you have to do. It is designed to be run locally on your network. It's incredibly secure, works great for financial institutions, government agencies, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, primarily because we don't store data. It runs on your network, it runs on your local machines, and we don't send anything back. It is designed to be secure from the get-go. To build out your test cases and really structure things accordingly, you've got roughly 100 plus types of different test steps and functions that you can take advantage of that allow you to really build a complex and robust test case, covering all aspects of your kind of environments or scenarios. Cross-browser testing gets covered, whether it's on a Windows machine, a Mac, a Linux machine, Chrome, Safari, IE, Edge, you name it, it's covered, mobile variants included. So you've got kind of a wide range of options when it comes to that. So from a Salesforce API standpoint, we support all the standard CRUD operations, SOQL queries, ability to execute anonymously. If you got existing Apex test cases, we can support those as well. And so that's some of the back end functions that we support. But beyond that, there's one really large aspect to automation that, whether you're talking about API testing or not, one of the hardest challenges with test cases and scenarios in general is the end-to-end story. In general, most environments, your applications and data and services are quite literally all over the map. There's no unifying approach or framework or simplification that allows you to kind of build a singular flow through that. So that leaves you with having to craft a lot of broken and disparate both test cases and test tools that let you test each of these different things and how the data moves through there. It's a very painful and time-consuming process. What Provar does is helps you really start to string those together into a single test flow and a single test scenario that covers the entire suite. Now, in theory, right, this all sounds really good and great. And, in the next logical question is that, how does this work in the real world, right? What does this actually look like at a customer site? Or, I brought Provar in, what does this actually look like? And so let's talk about a specific customer example here. Splunk they had a need to automate, their entire purchase order flow. And this covered a lot of different areas. It would need to touch Salesforce CPQ, and NetSuite at various points along the way. It needed to not just touch each of those, but it wasn't just a logical order or a moving from one to the next. It was a very, you do something in one of them and then you move into the other one and you go back to the other one. And then, there was a lot of back and forth and data validation and moving through a very long and complex cycle. And so trying to build that out using traditional tools, even just defining what that test itself looks like, is very complicated and cumbersome. And they brought Provar in specifically because we were able to handle this type of scenario. So what is this? I made the reference to being all over the map, but if we were to map out what this would look like for Splunk, this is a similar image to the map I showed a few minutes ago. And this kind of shows you how you start in Salesforce and then you move into Salesforce CPQ system, and then you jump back out to do some more work, and then you go back into CPQ, and then you move on down the line a little bit and you come back into NetSuite, come out of NetSuite, do some more stuff, go through the process. In the same time, you've got things happening in parallel in those systems, different actions occurring at the same time, and you're constantly bouncing back and forth between them. That's a very difficult process to manage doing it manually, much less trying to string it together into a cohesive view of what this would look like. So, you know, this sounds really wonderful, right? Sounds like a, you know, if you can automate this, that's great. But what is it, you know, the realities of that look like? So this is a comparison showing how moving, so that the test case that I showed you is one example. This is a few different test cases for that entire project, if you will. Couple of things to note on here. The first three boxes, the top two and the bottom left, are showing you reduction in minutes based on how many minutes a given flow took to work through. And if you get to the bottom right one, it's actually in hours. So they took an 18-hour manual process and reduced it to 2.5 hours from an automation standpoint. And at the end of the day, that is an absolutely phenomenal reduction in time and how long you actually are having to spend doing that versus being able to jump over and do something else. That's a big story that you can tell. The most impressive part of all of this is, while all of these numbers and metrics are impressive, as anybody that has done automation will tell you, automation is a very time-consuming and expensive thing to spin up and get going effectively. And to me, the most impressive aspect of this whole project, and one of the reasons why we really wanted to highlight this project with them, was that they did all this in 3 months after getting Provar. With no Provar experience prior to that, they were able to come in and pick it up, learn it, teach their entire team, and build this out and get these kind of results within a period of, 3 months. That is unheard of in the automation space. And so, that sounds wonderful, I know, right? But prove it. Okay. So what I would like to do is, hand this off to Michael Daly, one of our DevOps consultants, who's going to walk us through kind of what building a test case in Provar looks like and how that goes, and applies in this scenario. Michael, I'll hand it to you.
All right. Thank you, John. So here I am in a dev org that I'm logged into in Salesforce, and on the right side of your screen here, you'll see my Provar test builder that I have open. So this is what we actually use to build out the test cases through the UI. So I'm going to walk through a pretty simple scenario here of just creating a new lead and adding some assertions to that. And what I have so far is I have a connection step, which connects me to my Salesforce org, logs me in with my credentials, whatever profile I may be using, and then it's going to take me to the sales application here that I'm currently at. From there, I'm actually pulling some data in from an Excel spreadsheet that I'm going to be using to populate some of the lead values for the fields. So I'll just go ahead and show you what that looks like now. I'm going to go to the leads page. And from here, I'm going to right-click on this new button. So normally when you're doing this manually, you would just go through your flow, click where you need to go, type in whatever fields you need to enter. In Provar, each action that you take is actually recorded into your test case. So I'm going to right-click on that new button there and add that to my test case. And what you'll see on the test builder is that it actually loads in that field. And this is all pulled from the metadata, as John was mentioning. It pulls in the Salesforce lead home page, and it pulls in the field name. And then there's actually an interaction type that I can set for this particular field. Right now, it's defaulted to click because this is a button. You can, however, change this if you wish to do something different. I'll leave it for click. I'm going to add and do that test step. What that's going to do is that's going to create a new test step over here in my test case, where it's going to take me to the lead home page, click the new button, so that way I can continue on with the rest of my flow. All right, so we have our new lead window open here. So I'm going to go ahead, and the same way I added that new button, I'm going to add in some of these fields here. So I'll add a phone number. And what I want to do now, the interaction is now set. So instead of just typing in a random value here, I'm going to use in my lead data that I have for this Excel sheet. So I actually have a phone number here. I'm going to use that one. What that's going to do is that's going to add that step there. Once that step is done, I can continue on to the next field. So I'm going to add a first name value here as well. Same thing as before, I want to use that lead data spreadsheet, and I want to use my first name. I'm going to go ahead and add a last name, just filling in all my required fields. And then lastly here, I'm going to go ahead and set my company. And the lead source. All right, perfect. So all of those fields are filled in now. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on my save button. Now, whenever you're creating a new object or adding a new step here in Provar, you have the option to add a screenshot before and after the test step executes. So this would be a good time to do that. When I want to go back and look at this test case later on, whether it's through a report or through the logs, I can have those screenshots attached there. That'll help with reporting. Okay. Clicking the save button there is done, and we are in our new lead screen here that has been created. So like I said before, I want to go ahead and add a couple of assertions to this new lead, and I want to make sure that the status is correct. So I'm going to add this status here to my test case. And the interaction type is, instead of set or click, is now read assert, because I'm asserting a value on the screen. And once again, rather than using what's filled in there, I'm going to actually pull this from my spreadsheet. And that'll switch to my new lead view screen here, and it's going to perform that UI assertion, comparing the value to what we see on the page to what I specify in the expected value. That step is passed there. Now I'm going to add an assertion here for the phone number. And what I want to do here is, instead of using that value for the spreadsheet, let's say that I'm still getting used to Provar and maybe I fat finger something or I don't enter in the correct expected value here. So let's say I put in this value here, which is not what we're expecting. So what we'll see now is we see a red circle here, and this is indicating that this test step has failed. And so what we can do, I'll go ahead and minimize this window here and go back to the Provar application to show you what we've been working with. And if I scroll down here, we see the step that's failed, and we can actually see that it took a screenshot for me showing that page at the time. So I can see on that page the actual phone number is there, and of course I did not enter in the correct value. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my test builder and my page here, and I'm going to edit this test step, and I'm going to enter in the correct value. This time I've learned my lesson. I'm going to use the spreadsheet. And I'm going to use the phone number value there. There we go. All right, so now that step is passed. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this test case by clicking resume. All right, so what we'll see here is this test actually failed because we did have that step that failed there, but I did fix the part that was failing. So what I can do is I can actually go back and rerun this test case. So I'll do that now just to show you what it looks like from start to finish. So just like the steps that I've added here, it's going to take me to the lead homepage. It's going to click on the new button. And it's going to fill in the fields from the spreadsheet just like I added them before. And one thing to note here, while I was using the test builder, I was able to edit a test step that was failing previously, step backwards, and then of course re-execute that same test step. So the test builder does work like a real-time debugger, and that I can step to different points in my test case. I can edit it in real time and work through it that way. So this new lead is now created. It'll switch to the details tab and perform my 2 assertions for the phone number and the lead status. Okay, once that's done, it's logging me out, closing down that Chrome browser, and then we, of course, now have a successful test run. So that was just a simple example showing you how you could create a new lead and how you could add some simple assertions there, pulling all the values from a spreadsheet. I'll hand it back over to John now, who's going to continue talking.
Cool. Thank you, Michael. So to recap, what we were able to do over that demo was just creating a new lead, doing a few assertions, and then executing the test case. And start to finish, that took all of about 5 minutes. If you know anything about trying to write a similar test case using Selenium or any of the record playback tools that are out there, that takes a small bit longer than 5 minutes. So one of the things that, the next logical question is, okay, great, we've got test cases created, but it's really painful to run these from our desktop machine as part of our daily operations. So do you support running as part of a scheduled job, or we have a CI/CD pipeline? What does that look like from your perspective? And so, the short answer is, if you use a tool in the Salesforce ecosystem to kind of manage your CI/CD or DevOps integrations and pipelines, we support them. Either directly through native integrations or through using technology like Docker and Apache Ant to really flesh out the capabilities of it. You have lots of flexibility and options here. And to kind of give you an idea of what something like this would look like in the real world, we had another customer that we wanted to highlight in this case. They had a primarily a code-based Selenium framework that they had built and developed a lot of test cases. They did several hundred test cases covering lots of different scenarios, and they learned a very painful lesson when they moved from Classic to Lightning. It didn't migrate well. It was a very, very painful experience, and as you can read from Nikolai's quote here, they lost a lot of time, and was something that they really wanted to ensure that the next time around did not happen. So what did they do to kind of make that work? So they looked at the testing triangle, and they kind of revisited how they did testing in general. So while in the Splunk example, we saw a scenario where they were literally recreating the end user's flow through their system and all of the ancillary systems that went along with that. The approach that ALM Brand took was that they went at it from a slightly different perspective, and they decided to focus more on using the Salesforce API and going directly to the source for a lot of their actions, and would only go into the UI for the functionality based tests. So the things where they were actually testing how things worked on the screen. And if that wasn't a part of the actual test that they were doing, even on the assertions, because the way Provar works, we can do all of our assertions through the API as well. So that opened up a whole new paradigm for them to work through. It greatly reduced the amount of time that it took to build the tests. It reduced the amount of time the test took to execute, because rather than going through the UI and spending several minutes doing actions, even automating things, you still have the render time, the time to load the pages and perform all the actions, etc., when an API can do a lot of those same steps in literally seconds. So they tried to cut down on that as much as possible. That had a variety of other benefits to doing that as well, and that allowed them to really become a lot more agnostic to the different environments that they were doing, the different users that they were doing. They really opened up a lot of reuse capabilities as part of that. Then they enabled it to, they have now 150 test cases they run in roughly 2 hours, but they can run, there's 9 different Provar instances running in parallel. They run through their GitLab pipeline. Their current plan is doing it on a nightly basis. You could just as easily wire it into their check-in process and do it on check-in. But they've got it set up so they can work on code, promote it up, and see changes immediately, and using the same test cases throughout. He's got a note in here even that they actually built specific versions for the different versions of Salesforce, so they could even target if a given environment was a different version of Salesforce, it would actually run a different set of test cases that was designed specifically around that functionality accordingly. And that's all completely possible through our enablement on the DevOps side of things. So what that looks like from an actual result standpoint, one of my favorite, metrics ever is talking about how much time you save. They went from 86 hours of manual testing to 4 hours of manual testing, and they supplement that with 4 hours of automation that runs. And that was 86 hours per release. And now they get to do that. They get the automation part of that every single day, and they only have to spend 4 hours one time to wrap everything up. The time savings is incredibly huge. Moving fast can often introduce additional concerns and complexities. But what they saw, rather than seeing a spike in things that got out, they actually saw what they intended, which was their quality improved. Their user errors that were reported dropped from 39 to 17 over the 2-quarter period. And probably the best graph that I have seen in a long time. Anybody that has to deal with getting production hot fixes out knows how painful they can be sometimes, and how much work has to go into them, how much retesting, etc. And so, for everyone that you do, that's a lot of work on a lot of people's plates. They were able to take it from a high of 21 hot fixes to just 5 per quarter. And that is a very unbelievably impressive reduction. That's a 75% reduction. And that's something that traditionally they didn't have an option for doing that. And so that shows kind of the overall power of what Provar can bring to the table. So as we kind of move forward, everybody's obvious question at this point is, well, how much does it cost? Our annual license is $11,900 for a single license, but we do have multi-user packages available, 3 different tiers, standard, premier, and enterprise, that include volume discounts based on the number of licenses that you're looking for, how many concurrent users you're looking for. It's based on a user concurrency model, and so you have 5 user licenses, you can have 5 people in at a time, but those 5 people could bounce around if need be. So you've got a lot of flexibility there in terms of what you can do and things along those lines. So from that standpoint, I'm going to hand it back over to Hetty at this stage and let her kind of move us to the end.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. So as John said, we're almost at the end of our content. There's still time to ask some questions. So if you haven't yet asked your question, but you'd like to find out an answer, please go ahead and type that out into the questions box now. And finally, in terms of next steps, if you're interested in what we've been talking about today and you'd like to carry on this conversation with Provar, do get in touch with us after this webinar finishes. The easiest way to do that is actually via our post-webinar survey, which will launch as soon as the webinar closes today. And if you want to use that method, all you need to do is just tick to show that you're interested in follow-up, and someone will be reaching out to you shortly. If you're not quite at that stage, or you just like to learn a little bit more about Provar by yourself, do have a look at our websites, check out our blog, and you can always get in touch with us on there later on. So we're going to go over to questions now. We've had a few come in already, but we have a little bit of more time spare if you'd like to still ask one. I'll kick things off then with the first question. John, do you want to take this one? It says, do you offer trials?
We do. We actually offer both trials and a free POC. And typically we like to start with the POC just to, kind of prove our chops to you directly, and kind of give you the confidence. The advantage to that is that by doing that, you get to start with a pre-made set of test cases. So rather than having to spend a lot of your time during the trial period kind of stumbling through and figuring things out, et cetera, what you get to do is rather start with a pre-made scenario that's based on one of your existing test scenarios, test cases, and can use that and start building off of it and working with that. And you're actually now working with real, valid, ready to go content. So, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is, how does Provar differ from Selenium? And actually a similar question that's also come in is coding needed in Provar, or is it a codeless tool?
Yeah, so I can take this one as well, and I'm assuming the Selenium question is around the code-based, writing your own custom framework, et cetera. And under the covers, Provar still uses Celanese, still uses WebDriver to control the browser. So from the interaction standpoint, they're very similar. Where they're different is custom frameworks typically require you to write code, whereas Provar, like we said, is more in the clicks not code model. It's all UI driven. And the other big aspect is really around how we find the different elements on the screen, especially when it comes to Salesforce. In a lot of cases with a custom framework, you're having to work through that content, and there's a lot of dynamic and changing values. So you're finding things based on where they're at when you went to the page. The way Provar goes about it is we use the Salesforce metadata to actually drive finding those elements and working through those interactions directly. So when you go to a page, you're not having to look for the object on the screen. We already know where it's at. We just need to know what you're trying to do with that element in order to work with it effectively. So those are the two kind of main differences between them.
Thank you, John. The next question is, does Provar also require the use of a tool such as Browser Stack?
So in general, you can use Browser Stack, you can use Sauce Labs, but none of them are required. You can run locally, you can run using our Docker container. You can use, like I said, Browser Stack, you can use Amazon Device Farm. There's pretty much any of the platforms that are out there that support the kind of the WebDriver based model. And a good example, you could even take an existing Selenium grid infrastructure and run it on there as well. But none of those are required. You can run it right on your local machine. You can run it on a remote system if need be. You've got a variety of ways to execute.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question came up, I think, during the running of the demo as we were inputting data into the fields. And the question said, so Michael, I'll ask you this one. It said, can we use random phone number as well?
Yes, you can. So there's actually a method within Provar that allows you to generate a unique ID, and you can make this a unique numeric ID. So this will allow you to generate a random phone number if you wish to use that as your data.
Fantastic, thank you. This next question also came up in the demo, I think, and it said, is it possible to run multiple rows from an Excel spreadsheet in the same execution? So for example, if I have 10 rows with lead information.
Yes, you can. You can read in the data from the spreadsheet and then iterate over it. So what you could do is have 10 rows of information in your Excel sheet and then iterate through that in a for loop within Provar. And you could either call those rows individually through the API, or you could do it through the UI as well.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is for John. Could you talk a bit about what type of training we offer at Provar?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different options. The first is more kind of self-driven, self-paced, using our online content. We have a quick start guide that kind of gets you up and going. And then you can kind of use that in conjunction with some remote consulting or remote training time. And then we also offer an on-site training that is a week-long training session that basically takes you from Provar 0 to hero in 5 days.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is for Michael, and it says, how do you handle duplication of data in regression testing? Because the same data you enter while making the test case with the browser extension, the test builder, will be used over and over again with regression testing.
This is actually a good question, and we do have a way to handle this. So there is, in your connection step within Provar, you can enable it to auto cleanup, which is usually the way that we end up going when we're doing this in lower level environments. For instance, I was just in a dev org. What I would do is just set that to auto cleanup, so that way each time that test case runs, whatever data it's creating throughout the life cycle of that connection, it'll automatically delete that data at the end of the test case once it completes. So that way you don't have that duplicate records just staying in your org forever.
Fantastic, thanks, Michael. The next question is for John, and it says, can you integrate test results to other PPM tools? If yes, then which?
So in general, we don't have anything natively built today. We have some stuff coming in the future for some of the test case management tools that are out there. But our kind of our default is, if there's an API to use, we have a variety of pre-built custom test step types that you can use to push reporting results into whatever system you need via their API. So if they've got an API endpoint that you can send a result set to, we provide all of that through functions that you can then use and pass that data over to another system accordingly. And like I said, we have some stuff coming here in the next few releases that will start to make that more of a native integration with some of the bigger platforms that are out there.
Great, thanks. John, the next question is also for you. Could you talk a bit about how Provar does testing for web testing aside from Salesforce?
Yeah, so in general, we support Salesforce using their metadata. Not every platform and website out there provides that type of backing. So in that case, we do drop off to standard page object based module. But what we do is we've built through Test Builder kind of a point and click interface for building those out. Some auto dynamic generators for the XPath locators and things like that to really simplify how you find the elements on the screen accordingly, and then building the correct XPath and doing some custom Provar magic behind the scenes to really make those robust and make it a little bit more of a solid experience.
Awesome, thank you. Question for Michael. Is there another way to fetch test data other than a spreadsheet?
Yes, you can. So that was just an example for this demo, but you can fetch that test data from any of your data sources you may be using. So whether that's an API that you want to fetch it from, if it's a REST or a SOAP API, and then also if it's a database that you have some kind of data that you have stored in there, you can retrieve it from there. And there's also CSV and JSON files are supported in the tool.
Fantastic, thanks Michael. So we're almost at the end of our time now. I'm just going to take a few more questions, but there are still quite a few coming in. So if we haven't had a chance to answer your question, I'll make sure that somebody follows up with you over email and we can carry on the conversation there. So final few questions then, and the next one is, do you have a website where detailed Provar tutorials are available? I can answer that. Yes, have a look at provartesting.com. And if you take a look at our support section, you'll find there a quick start guide and some other documents that have a little bit more information about step-by-step using Provar, and you might be interested in browsing that general support section as well. And so final question then, I'll take anyone who wants to answer this one. It says, can we integrate test management tools such as Jira with Provar?
So I can take this one. It's kind of in line with the previous question as well. Today, because Jira is actually a very challenging one to write a native plugin for, primarily because it's so customizable. I have yet to see in 10 plus years the same test management method or system used in more than one place where it would translate one-to-one. So in that case, the answer is we have some, again, pre-built API calls that you can use, and you just customize to however you're using the test management within Jira. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, so you almost have to do a custom solution each time. But when I say custom, it's you have to tweak the order of the fields or what different types of whether it's a test case item, whether it is a story, whether it's an epic, whatever the case may be, you've got a lot of different ways you could push the data over. So you just need to tweak that. It can take 5-10 minutes to make the adjustments and you're done.
Fantastic, thanks guys. So that's all the time that we have for questions. So I'll be closing the webinar here. Apologies if we hadn't had the chance to answer your question. We'll make sure that everyone gets a follow-up by email to get your questions answered. In terms of next steps, just as a reminder, if you're interested in having somebody follow up with you regarding using Provar in your company, do use our post-webinar survey to get in touch with us. That will launch automatically when the webinar closes shortly. So all you need to do is to tick that you show you're interested, and someone will reach out to you after this. We have been recording this session, as I said, and I'll make sure the video is sent around to everyone who registered in case you'd like to watch that again. And so finally, I'd like to say thank you again to our presenters, John and Michael, and thank you to all of you for attending. Goodbye for now.